Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. That's a very wide translation. It's pretty wild if you really know what that says. And she bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought forth the fruit of the ground, an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he brought also of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain in his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth? And why is thy countenance fallen? If thou dost well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou dost not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against his brother and slew him. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which thou hast opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven. Even if he would have said, All right, I can take it, maybe this whole thing wouldn't have been so prolonged. I don't know. We keep going deeper and deeper. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mahajael, and Mahajael begat Methuselah, and Methuselah begat Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name, this gets, you'll get a little sense of what we're trying to get at here in a bit. And the name of one was Adah, and the other was Zilhah. And Adah bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 70-fold, shall Lamech 70 and sevenfold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God said, She hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his son Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. We'll just break off there and come back to some of it in a little bit. The sin of Cain is sometimes called the second sin. The first sin was a selfish use of the generative force. Selfish and used before we knew how to use it properly. And we introduced an adharmonious state into the cosmos by generating bodies and generating personalities that were rebellious and out of tune with the cosmos, as we've been talking about all year so far. So it's a very curious thing that while there was cooperation or complicity with each other, there was the beginning of non-cooperation. And with the second sin, even complicity or cooperation deteriorated. There are a lot of ironies in this kind of thing when you think of the fact that the act that requires the greatest degree of cooperation began our tendencies toward uncooperation and toward separation from each other. And so we're going to look tonight for quite a while at the degeneration of character, or how things started falling apart along the trajectory set in the lines of the first and second sins. I want to read a little bit more just so you get a feel of what we're dealing with, and I'm going to go to other places. Chapter 5. What we just read was chapter 4. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of man, in the likeness of God he made him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image, and called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. And Seth lived 100 years and 5, and begat Enos. And Seth lived after he begat Enos 807 years, and begat sons and daughters. You get the whole picture. Huh? 800 years, 900 years. Yeah, we'll mention that a little bit. And it came to pass when I'm jumping over to chapter 6 now, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of men came into the daughters, sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination and thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping things and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. And then it goes on to the story of Noah. It continues forth until in the 11th chapter, it says, And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, Go, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men had builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined. Go to, let us go down, and there confound this language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad, and from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. It goes on to many, many begats and generations, which is what we want to talk about. Talk about boring. Obviously, all of the generations, the begats, do not mean necessarily generations. They don't even mean individuals. They don't even mean only dynasties or clans. But they do mean those things as well. It's very clear from the way that the name Adam is used and that the name Cain is used that it is a collective clan. But it is much, much more than that. Mystic seers claim that while these names of generations do point to individuals and dynasties, they primarily point to changes in the state of consciousness. So seers trained in the mysteries claim that the 4th, 5th, on to the 10th and 12th chapter represent the beginnings or the descriptions of the third creation story or the third evolution story. The first creation story that we looked at was the creation of form out of chapter 1 of Genesis. The second creation story that we looked at was in chapter 2 of Genesis, and in the second story, humans are created first, whereas according to the form, human form was the last to be evolved. The second creation story is a recapitulation, and in this, only the consciousness of the human, which is awakingly self-conscious and part of the creative hierarchy, it names or forms the bodies for all of the other animal species that follow after. So the second evolution, or the second creation story, is the story of the creation of life. The third creation story, or evolutionary story, is the story of the evolution of waking consciousness, the progress and the stages that one goes through. Initiates claim that if they read through the begats as they get to each name, and sometimes they have little one-phrase thumbnail descriptions of them, that each name brings up they're like tags or like markers, and they bring up a different kind of consciousness that each went through. So when it says that Adam lived 900 and some years, it's saying that Adam, as the patriarch, lived in the consciousness, in the conscious memory, because in those days, memory was everything, and conscious reasoning, deliberate ratiocination was almost nothing. And so when someone lived in the blood cells, in the genetic memory, for so many hundreds of years, that was the memory of their life and of their deeds, and of that kind of consciousness that was supposed to be carried out through that sub-cycle or through that sub-cycle or whatever all the names mean. So we have an involution of life, an evolution of form, and a progression of consciousness. However, when we start looking, as we just did, at these generations, it doesn't seem like progress. To the contrary, it seems more like devolution. It seems that the more that humans progressed, the more self-centered they became, the more seditious they became, more nasty and sexually impure. For that matter, it looked like it got so bad that within this progress, or regress, whatever you want to call it, from whatever vantage point, it was not straight line, but it was cyclical. We see in the story of Noah, and there are other stories in there, the destruction of Sodom, and there are occasionally complete destructions to start over afresh. So there are cycles of that type. So this is like everything else in evolution. It is a cyclical activity. Now, we see more and more of sexual deviation, sexual excess, and accompanying it, violence. The sex and violence that are still besetting us with great enormity, they're presented to us mostly in the illusionary Luciferic devices, where you see images that aren't real living images. You look at a television screen, and what you're seeing there is not the same thing as when you see with your eyes, or when you're looking at a movie screen. You're not looking at a reality. You're looking at an image of a reality that is illusory. And so it is very much, it goes all the way back to the Luciferic times, when they lit up our spines, and we saw pictures inwardly that made the use of the generative force very much desirable to us, and we were flattered with it all. So it isn't new that there is sex and violence. It goes all the way back to the first and second sins in the Old Testament. So we have these cyclical purgings, and they're followed by even more perverse sex and violence. Since we are now in the upswing out of matter and out of materialism, we are seeking to free ourselves from these hardening and extremizing tendencies to sexuality and violence. So what we want to do now is look at these things and look at them to see what is involved, so that we can find a creative or an efficient way to rise up out of our condition that certainly isn't the very best. Now, in a previous talk, we have talked about what actually the consequence of the fall was. We enumerated a list of things such as hardening and egoism and materialism and a separative mind and overweening desire, and finally we mentioned the preoccupation with self. What I would like to do now is look at those same things all over again, because they are the things that we as humanity share in common, and they are the most important things, or the most important deviations that we have made in our evolutionary career. And if we can overcome these general conditions, then we can, along the way, we can take care of our personal sins. So let's look at them all over again. We just noted that the progression from the first to the second sin was a projection from a cooperative non-cooperation, a divine disobedience, to an overt general uncooperation. What we didn't note is that this progress from one to the other, that there is a logical connection or a cosmological connection between the first and second sin. And the undoing the effects of the first and second sin, that is of sex and violence, we have to understand that principle in order to come out of it. All right. I'm going to go and read straight from the notes at this point, because what I want to say here is a very important statement, and that is the inharmonious self-assertion to take something, that is, to take something sexually, as in take me, honey, within it has a necessary, inherent, discrete separativeness which applies to both subject and object and to the assertive action itself. I'll repeat that. The inharmonious self-assertion of taking something has within it a necessary, inherent, discrete separativeness which applies to both subject and object and to the assertive action itself. That's a principle, a very fundamental principle of everything that we're dealing with. Whether we act harmoniously with the plan of the evolutionary creation or whether we rebel, in either case, one of the primary intents of the evolutionary creation is experience. We are going through this enormously long and wondrous experience, many lives through many states of being for experience. And you might say that with the millions of us that have been created, are created to each be a different eye for getting more experience. In terms of time, space, spirit, matter, this means a vigorous interaction between spirit and matter, or between the stuff of time and space, between the active and the static. So what we are participating in is like the old Tin Pan Alley song, when an irresistible force meets an immovable object, is precisely what we are here for, is to experience through that. In the first sin, the sin of Adam and Eve, there is a compound separation within the spirit-matter continuum in a really simple way. Before this, we had a unified all-consciousness. But when we reached out for something, in the process of reaching out for that and doing so without harmony, without attentiveness to the intent of the one, of the all, we separated ourself within the all. That's one part of the separation. The second part is I can be careful here. I'll lose my place and I'll really get lost because this is a very tough set of notes. When we reached out for something, we produced a second separation. That is the separation between ourselves as subjects and ourselves and something outside of us as objects. So in the process of individuation, especially in the process of individuation, when we negated the connection with the all, we separated ourselves from the divine. And we did that by reaching out for something without doing it harmoniously with the whole flow of relating to the external. And in doing that, we produced a materialistic dualism. The materialistic dualism is that I am the one that wants something and there is this thing. Proceeding further in that direction, there is another compound dualism, because once we separate one object from the background, one thing that we focus on, we have separated and we have developed a thinghood. It's become a rather insidious thing now, so that we even consider personas or personalities as things. We no longer see the spirit. Even sometimes people that just radiate all kinds of spiritual truth and intelligence out of their being. We still see the separate personality, and we see it as a thing. And it isn't surprising that the way that we see things in the worst way is in sexuality, right where it began. We see people as sexual objects, as things, rather than as something that we unify with spiritually. So the action of reaching out for something or taking something has within itself a compound separation. So the whole of this process, you might say, is an action, reaction, attraction, repulsion, separation. Yes?
I know the inharmonious reaching out was the awareness of the lack of harmony.
Yes, because by then we had already taken the temptation to do something, even though there was a command, which was probably not just laying down the law. It was a statement that if you don't do this, because if you do, you will be very sorry. Or it may even have been in our consciousness in a different way. It is very wise to do things as they are done, and if you part from that, you're parting from the wisest course of action. So we sort of knew it, but we really weren't self-conscious in the way that we are self-conscious now. So we knew that we were doing. It wasn't complete ignorance. All right. So so this is it is not only an attraction of something to ourselves. It is a repulsion and a separation of an object from all other objects. Or it is a repulsion, you might say, that the death of others around us in this repulsive separation is sort of a mirror image of what is called the death of God, because we were no longer paying attention. We were more and more losing intuitive spiritual connectedness, and when losing the intuitive spiritual connectedness, we inverted it and said God is dead. Rather than saying we're dead, we project and see it the opposite from the way things really are. In fact, we're going to see that all along in the story tonight, that everything is done in such a way that that there is... I'm afraid I was recording again. We're going to see that there are two ways of looking at all things that we're going to be interpreting tonight. So we can see then the entrance into our identity, as well as our identification of things around us, is fraught with dualism, extreme dualism, especially when we get to materialistic conceptions. We have extreme dualism, such that we cannot, in some ways, the whole mind-body problem, not only as a philosophical problem, but especially as a psychological problem, how we relate to objects and how we maintain psychological health in the face of objects is an extremely thorny kind of dualism, because we have so much parted things from ourselves. Because, when things have become that hardenedly externalized, we don't have the withinness or the throughness that we can feel things in us and ourselves in other things. So the dualism is a very treacherous kind of dualism. Last time we talked a lot about, I hate to say it, vibrations. I don't like that term at all. I just wish there were a better one altogether. We noted that in both the horizontal and the vertical, in the whole of the cosmos, if we can be in touch with it, unity is never lost. So if unity is never lost, then the relationship between the subject and object, or the relationship of the subject and the all, are really connected with each other, and the separation is more virtual. So when there is not a spiritual recognition of our actions, which from the material point of view looks like a divine approbation from the one, there is a resulting extreme, violent assertion in personal separation. It's like saying, once we forget the unity and the connectedness of all, and we go for something, that this results because we no longer have the unified guidance. We no longer have that gentle, subtle spirituality, like we're all part of one thing. We then go out with an extreme, wrenching kind of violence, and it results then that there are extreme separation, extreme repulsions. Materialism is something that is born of that. So this is literally what it means when we choose matter over spirit. This means that the divine energy then becomes violent without the divine spiritual connection. In other words, it's extreme, we're lost. And we're blinded, literally, in this kind of consciousness. Now, this is really interesting again. So, when the gift of Cain is ignored, that's the way you see it from Cain's eyes. Cain's saying, God is ignoring my gift. From God's eyes, Cain is ignoring the connectedness with the one. You see what I'm trying to say? That it's totally different. It's like you've seen arguments with people. Marriage counselors have to deal with them all the time. And what each person might be saying in a struggle is true. But it is a point of view. And each person's point of view might be very different than the others. And the extremity of it makes it seem like something different. So when the gift of Cain is ignored, the next thing that happens is, now that the connection with the divine is gone, the release of the energy becomes violent energy. So when we reach out for something, we close off the unity, at least the way we did it. We close off the unity, and when the unity is closed off and we start reaching out for things, we reach out with extreme selfish violence. So we can see that there's a lot of destructiveness. To put this in the jargon of modern esotericism, it is saying that the first sin results in a kind of possessive, holding, satanic or ahrimanic egoism, but that gives way to the second sin, which results in a violent, repellent, luciferic egotism, because it is from a body directed to a body, and it is much more materialistic. Yes?
What was the basis of Abel's book and not being the normal thing?
I'm coming to that right now. We have this thing going that there's hardly ever that I ever give a talk that Jim doesn't anticipate the next thing I'm going to say. We have very close to each other. We have the same rising signs. I think he's in tune with everything I'm trying to say. All right. No. This is pretty deliberate. This is almost simplistically straightforward, but it's all right. If the generative creation or the fabrication is not harmonious, then the release and the energy and the death are not peaceful. So this is the same. What I'm trying to say by that statement is like when we said last time that when we work right on a pitch with things, when we get too hyperactive, we produce one kind of physical condition, or if we become too sluggish and selfish and hold on to something, we become hypoactive, at least in that part of our being, and in illness results. So we can see that this dualism, the way we relate to the within and the without, and the separation of objects or within subjects, is all the within without is something that we have to maintain. It's like saying we have to remember the source of the perfect pitch to not get off key into materialism as we have done. Now, Cain's gift was a gift of the earth, and it was not respected, while Seth's gift was an animal gift, and it was respected. What? I'm sorry, Abel's. I'm sorry, yeah. There are a lot of interpretations that could be given to that. One is that this is an unusual interpretation, but I think it has some vague validity to it, but it isn't central to it. It is to say that when we started plunging into matter, we needed albumin to build our bodies because the hardened bodies needed the protein. And Cain remaining a vegetarian or being a vegetarian in non-vegetarian times was disrupting things, and so he was in a way psychologically forced into that kind of activity. A more mystical interpretation of that is, if you remember the very first year of these talks when we were going through the Eleusinian mysteries, we talked about the three herdsmen in the court where Demeter acted as wet nurse when she was looking for Persephone. There was a shepherd, a cowherd, and a swineherd. I can remember the name of the swineherd. I believe it was Eubulius. And they represented the marshaling of different kinds of emotions. The animals, as in dreams, animals always represent objectified emotions. And because Cain was not a shepherd, while Abel was, is in a very symbolic way saying that Cain was not taking care of his emotions and was careless about all of them. in this interpretation, since Abel did tend the animals and he did give them over to God, he tended his emotions, he really didn't fall, and that brings out another side. It brings out the letting of the blood and what happens as a result of that. We'll come to that a little bit more. Both of these interpretations may be true. There may be other interpretations. I have never looked into other esoteric interpretations of this passage at all. All right. If we follow this basic thing that we've been following, the relationship of separation and the release of violence, we find that it continues down through the generations into extremism. It gets so far in some cases that the generative force can't possibly even result in generation. And therefore, when the energy is bottled up, or when it can't possibly fulfill its intention, it results in a destruction. That's the kind of cosmologic that the Bible seems to have in this. Not much is mentioned in all of this in talking about the extremity of sexuality and the extremity of violence. Not much is mentioned of the worst things that were done. And that is all of the evil sorcery that was done at that time, using the sexual energy to manipulate other people and to destroy their bodies and to even try to take heaven by storm by using evil sorcery. I think the reason for this is that the authors of the Bible, when they brought it to the state where it was going to be written down, decided to not talk about that because people would be fascinated, just like there are copycat things where people see things in movies or on television or read them in books, and then they have to do it themselves because they get fascinated. It's interesting to note that the apocryphal books of the Bible, both Old and New Testament, are apocryphal for precisely that reason, because they're willing to speak of the exotic things that the standardized or the accepted version accepted version takes. It's interesting in all of this because what we note of it is something that is astrologically fundamental. Because what happened with the abuse of the sexual energy in terrible magic produced even greater hardening. So much so that the earth was in danger of becoming a cinder. And in order to keep this from happening, the moon had to be torn off. And if we look at the story of Adam and Eve and Abel and Cain, as we've been looking at it now, that very same principle that we've been looking at is explicit in cosmological astrology. That is, first, we, the earth, were separated from the sun, the source of spiritual light. But we, in that separation, are coming into our selfhood. We became selfish and materialistic, and we hardened the earth so much that it was necessary to throw the moon off. So you have a separation from the connection with the whole solar system into a discrete planet. And because we did that inharmoniously, or because our evolution at that time was inharmonious, we hardened our planet so that the moon had to be set off. And we know now from astrology that all of the vital life and all of the, the vitality that a person has is primarily indicated by the sun. Whereas all of the hardening and the formative forces that make for separation of body through the generative Jehovistic principle are associated with the moon. If there's too much sun, there's too much life and it burns things up. If there's too much moon, there's a terrible, terrible crystallized hardening. So like in a very simple formula of sun, moon, and earth, or humanity between the sun and the moon, we see the principle of Adam and Eve in Abel and Cain. So we see then that, all right, going on, the violence is not only directed in specific actions for specific things, it becomes generalized. That the earth is peopled, and there are many, many people, and they're all becoming more and more sexually perverse, and this results in the need for generalized destructions. So we have like the destruction of Noah, where everything had to be wiped out and start all over. The separation of subject and object increases right down to the last little story or fragment of the story that we looked at, so that there was confusion of languages, so that even the common intelligence, the common ability to think and to share the same truths that are common to all of us, broke down. So the separation carries right into, so that we almost lost our psychological integrity. And it all happened again when we, with vaingloriousness, tried. Yes. All right. All of these trends, these continuous trends to greater and greater materialism and greater separation and greater sexual violence seem in some ways like degradations. They seem very repugnant to us, and they're described in the Bible as such. But they are that, but they're also something more. They are necessities. That once we have set something in motion, we carry it out. And one cannot take the original sin that we now see as a general cosmic creative formula. We're going to see it even more in just a few moments. One cannot act on that, and one cannot start that perversely without it coming out of it, continuing in one thing out of another, necessarily flowing out of it. You know, you don't get oranges from an apple tree. If you sow weeds, you're going to get weeds. The course of the evolutionary creation cannot be halted because we made errors. This isn't like an orchestra or a little band saying, all right, we made an error from the top. You just can't quit, you know. The ultimate of psychological and spiritual health means consistency and follow through. The divine always follows through. Because all of this takes place within an irrefragable unity, and because that unity is a very subtle, rare, and lively thing, it is capable of adapting. Which means to say that what we need to get out of this, we will get out of it despite the course that we have taken. So when we have come down this road, we can't say it isn't there. Psychologically, we would know that as repression. And all kinds of crazy things happen when you say the truth isn't the truth and the energy lives inside of yourself. You're going to just tear yourself up inwardly. So it is I don't know this for a fact. I'm taking this on intuition. But it seems to me that all of the evolutionary intents for us as humanity can and probably will be fulfilled even though we have taken a trajectory or a swing or a course that is deviant from the intended course. Probably know that we work hard to do it. Just put in more extreme effort. Probably what it means when it says by the sweat of thy brow. If you take a harder, deeper, more insistent course, you're going to have to work harder to do it. Like if you don't walk down the road, if you go crosswalks, you got to expect that's what's going to come with it. All right. Let's look at our deviation. Somebody could think this was an awfully perverse course for the words that are used, I guess. All right. A few minutes ago, we looked at the story of the second sin and Cain not tending to his animal desires. 2 talks ago, we looked at the hardening quality of desire. If we indulge and give ourselves over to desire, even the desire to do good things, if we indulge in that, it leads to psychological hardening. Whereas the indulgence in material sensation leads to a sensualistic material hardening. For example, the gourmand is counterproductive. That in seeking all those rich, lavish tastes, cloys the sense of taste, so that eventually food never tasted so good that after you have fasted and you've cleansed your body and you taste food, you can taste all the subtle little nuances in it. Whereas if you've eaten about a pound of foie gras or something like that, foie gras, I guess is the way it's pronounced, it's pretty difficult to have a delicate tongue. Last time we said that hyperstimulated desire expressed in our bodies often leads to hyperactive organs or systems or such like that. And we said that by being out of time, by either being sharp or being flat, we produced illness and we produced pains of one kind or another by not having our whole body in tune. Everything was altogether out of tune. All right, now we want to take those 3 things, the story of the not tending to our desires, the hardening effect of indulgence, and stimulation leading to hyperactive or hypoactive when we go flat eventually. Let's try to synthesize those things with which the things we've been talking about tonight, and go a little bit further. We have been looking at how differentiation within or from the one releases energy. This is something that works, the principle that we're talking about, the relationship of Cain being born to Adam and Eve. This separation within the one releases energy. This is a principle that is the very same principle as fission. You split an atom, you release energy. Every time that you produce an internal separation, there is a release of energy. And this separation leads to an externalization within the oneness. And that is something like a cosmic mitosis, where separating within the one, within the one, within the one, and differentiating all the while, it's just like an egg inside the shell. It starts out as one cell, and separates and separates and differentiates and separates and differentiates. In that case, the heat or the energy is added externally in the incubatory energy from the parents that sit on the nest. We'll try to unify more of this as we go on. So where the principles that work in brute nature, like fission and mitosis, are actually psycho-spiritual principles that we see work in the psychology of our own sinful natures. We've actually been looking at the inverse for the most part. We've been looking at the assertion of energy results in differentiation. When we reach out for something, we separate ourselves from the one as beings who reach out, and we separate that thing from its background. And so there is a subject-object mutual identification and mutual separation. Now, the same thing, we've also said that in this process, the Lucifers tried to make us sharp. They tried to make us extremely assertive. And when that took place, that extreme assertion led to violence, and the violent separation then led to extreme differentiation and extreme materialization. Now we can look at that all, that led us to becoming flat. Now we can see that the whole thing we can see from the other way around. You might say that the whole cosmos is, we've said it before, an assertion. It is the assertion of an invisible dream that becomes externalized and materialized, and then the spirit steps into its externalized materialization, and it plays for keeps. So when we're talking about the assertion of an energy to materialize, we're talking about basically the same thing that is in Hamlet's statement, to be or not to be. That's a statement about action and the consequent madness, the loss of the unity when one goes into the dream. If you examine Hamlet's speech, it's all about the madness that follows after he goes into taking actions. And if you look at the character of Hamlet, if there ever was a dualist, it's Hamlet. He's really divided inwardly. Okay. Thus, when we look at Cain, and we see the closed circuit, or the open circuit of the union with the divine being cut off, what it does, it releases a violent stream of energy, and it goes mad and kills. Oh.
Where it seems like, in a way, like he's doing good, but comes up with a bad result or effect. What was he doing wrong by tending to the soil or whatever?
Well, he was. I think we were intended to be people who got on with things. The stories as they're given in the Bible are exceedingly abbreviated. It would be like an abbreviation for 10 words in 2 letters or something like that. And I think part of the reason is that we were intended to be more active people, and that if we had remained shepherds, if we had remained plant eaters, we wouldn't have accomplished. We have a whole subcontinent of people that have remained vegetarian for many hundreds of years, and their accomplishment in terms of doing things in the world is just exactly that. Not, the progress hasn't taken place. And it's very interesting to note that when societies do take on flesh eating, they take on more worldly accomplishment. And I think that like when you started down a course, you can't be gentle about it. I'm trying to say you can't be tentative, or you can't hold back. And I think that what seems like it may have been a good course to take wasn't, like saying you got to get on with what you're doing. But then what happened is he overreacted to the separation. All right. I don't want to make it too personally psychological. Is that more helpful to you? Okay. We have looked at how separating an object when we are separated from the divine leads to a violent assertion of energy, because the controlling mechanism is gone, and in the splitting separation it is whammo. It just happens. Now, this same principle is true in reverse. When the divine takes action or speaks out, the invisible dream gets congealed in the potential of space within the absolute, and it becomes a resistance. Every assertion of action results in a crystallization of energy. So the process is, how would you say it? It continues on itself. We separate ourselves from the divine, and this has the result of letting loose all kinds of uncontrolled actions with great luciferic, sharp intensity, and this brings up greater resistance. So the hardening is not only a consequence of indulgence, as we noted a few weeks ago, it's a consequence of resistance. It's as if to say, when we assert ourselves, we bring up resistance, and that resistance helps the intent of the assertion that we have made in the first place. Now, if you think about this, there are all kinds of things about this. This is why in struggles where there are difficult situations, like the Bible says, resist not evil, because if you resist evil, you actually give it a chance to express itself more strongly. Now, this is a principle that universally happens on all planes. I'm sure you all know that some of the resistance isn't always hard resistance. It's psychological resistance. If you say, I'm going to do such and such, immediately that calls up just the kind of temptation, or calls up just the kind of psychological condition, so that you don't want to follow through on what you're supposed to do. Everybody smiles at that because everybody knows what it's like. We've all resolved to do so many things, and we do it with such egoistic pride, and oh my goodness, we fall on our face before, and we don't even know we've fallen on our face. All right. Strange as this may seem, this is benign. Now, since the fall, there has not been a harmonious yoking of experience with insight. We've mentioned it before, that because of this, we have to have many experiences before we learn our lesson. So, if the object of evolution is experience, then it is, in a way, if we have become deviant and we have lost the subtle insight, it is a blessing that when we lose the divine control, that we really do take off with all of this desire. I've got to get this, or I've got to get that, or I'm going to stop this, or I'm going to stop that. When you do that, with that release of desire, then you have a greater impact with the resistance. When you have the greater impact with the resistance, then the lesson sinks in better. So there is, see what I'm trying to say, that desire, even though we're trying to gain control of it and use it to serve us, and so that we can operate and accomplish things in a wiser, subtler way, desire being extreme, as it has become extreme when we lost our control of it, is in a way benign. beneficent even, because it gives us what we need, because this is going to help us on our way. We've become kind of numb to the world, and this will be helpful to us. I can say that in this kind of a group, because not everybody's going to go out and start living fully desireful lives, because we're people that are on the upswing, and we have the intuition in us, and we know better than to do it purely on desire. But what I'm trying to say is that though the world seem bad in all of these regards, desire included, there really is something benign that is in it. There isn't something that is outright evil. What we are in is so beautiful that even if we intentionally try to go against it or to deviate from it, the consequence is that since we never fully left the unity, we just lost conscious participation in it. The unity is so beautiful that even our badness is used to some good and to some extent. So, violence and hard materialism and objectivism are valuable, and they fulfill the divine intent in some way. So the violence and the wickedness and the confusing separations, especially when we get to Babylon, if we see them from the Bible point of view, they're described as being loathsome. But if we look at it another way, we can see that there really is something good, because you can't stop the whole business just because, it's because things got a little rough. Or just because we screwed up doesn't mean we can stop the whole of evolution. All right. There's another side to this. The redemption is right in the action itself. There is a principle that if we live in our body all the way to the end and just sort of become more and more limited as we go on, and like the humane sibyls that we shrivel up until there's nothing left of us than our voice, that's an all right thing. But when we do that, there is more in the soul nature, in our psychic nature, that becomes attached to the body. When there is a violent letting of blood, we know this from all kinds of totem things, like the passages in the Odyssey, or the passages in the Aeneid, or the spirits that are earthbound. In order for them to be able to have enough energy to materialize themselves so that Odysseus or Aeneas can see them, there has to be a great letting of blood. And when there's this letting of blood in a trough, the ancestors come and they suck up this energy, and with that sucked up energy they can materialize, and then they can talk to their descendants. This is a general principle. When we are in our etheric vehicles, when we are in that soul nature, and we die a bloody death, we are released from the body immediately, rather than if we just linger in the body and it becomes something like a habit. Bob knows this as the principle of samsara, that there is an incarnate desire, or there is an incarnate attachment or habit or addiction to matter. And so the creation of materialism is the result of violent assertions of desires, both by the hardening of indulgence, and now we see by the built-up resistance, but at the same time it becomes the release. So we find people who have careers that they become warriors, for example. They are conquerors. They want this whole world. And then they have a series of violent deaths, and after a series of violent deaths and a number of rebirths, they leave that because they don't have that attachment anymore. This is what esotericists say about the death of Jesus, that the Christ entity to be released from the body of Jesus without having a samsara, to be attached to the earth and want to come back here and cling here in an earthly vehicle again, had to die by the letting of blood. In fact, a big deal is made about it called the cleansing blood. It not only cleanses us in one way, I won't go into that, it's another big expression, but for the Christ it was a cleansing also, a cleansing and a release from the physical and attachment to the physical. Because that being had to experience everything that we experience in order to give us an out. You know, we want to listen to a stranger who doesn't know what we go through. We want a sympathetic ear that we can listen to, somebody who's gone through what we've gone through, and that's what Christ went through in the incarnation in the body of Jesus. Another really interesting thing about this is that for all of the terrible carnage of animals that we kill and kill and kill, this is going to break the chain. Remember, we said that the Lucifers, by their selfishly wanting to stay in the old moon period, wanting to stay with the hot mist because they love the creative activity there, they started a cycle of selfishness which has carried us deep into matter as we now exist. The cycle will be broken for the animals because they will not have that kind of samsara, because they have died again and again violently, and so the cycle will be broken. So there is something in this, that there is redemption for the animals because they have to suffer from us, and they have to go through a much more dense world that was intended in the first place, and they're going to be freed from that. All right. I have a whole bunch of other things here. We're on page 5. We're going along. We might make this all right within 90 minutes. All right. None of this justified violence on our part, but even unjustified were valuable. Even as criminals, which we in some ways are every day, we're valuable. All right. Desire is a pretty good stand-in for us if we aren't divinely inspired. Better than if we were people who did nothing because we had no gumption about us. It's much better to be divinely inspired and driven by the Spirit to do things. But if we don't have that, desire is an all right stand-in. At least we get the experience. All right. The next thing that we have to deal with is much more difficult, and that is that our minds, through such exclusive dedication to opaque external matter, have become materialistic. And that's much more difficult to reconcile with divine evolutionary intent, because we are intended to become creative beings, and as long as we become preoccupied with opaque matter and we have to be involved with the analysis and the destruction of things by analytical methods, it's like saying that even the understanding of energy that we have only the understanding of entropic energy. We only understand energy when it's dying and going into a state of chaos rather than seeing live energy. It's a much harder one to reconcile. But what is happening in this is that I believe it is producing the consciousness whereby the concentration on surfaces and objects is leading us back to the intuition with a different kind of intuition. Not an intuition where we are led innocently through the experience of life, but an intuition where we try to know the meaning of something merely from its surface. We used to, like the animals, be able to read each other's souls. We knew what was going on inwardly. But now we have to look at what is sometimes a poker face. And we don't know what that face is saying to us. And when we have to ask, why is this like this? And when we study every little nuance, and boy, science studies every little nuance to the greatest detail, this is preparing us for a different kind of intuition, an intuition that is based on questioning and on very, very thorough observation. I'm getting at the point where I have to start cutting. There's one more thing about this extreme objectivism. When we see things as singularities, as separate objects, we get an objectivity that is simple, extremely simple, so that we see one thing in one way at one time. I can only see the front of all of you. I can't see either of your behinds. Might I make up for it at other times? But that leads to a very special kind of objectivity. When we see a singularity like that, and we see it as separate and stand alone, and from that singularity are able to connect to universal principles, that is the kind of mind or the kind of consciousness that we are developing, which when applied to all of the inner consciousness will not have the innocent kind of intuition, which may well be regained, but it will lead to a different kind of intuition, a different kind of insight, which no other being in the cosmos will have. And this is a blessing that we have even with our materialistic mind, which is dangerously, dangerously materialistic. But something else is involved in this, because we can never, unless we do have the penetrating spiritual vision, we can never really see what is behind, and we can only make inferences. And we never know, we never see the connection between cause and consequence, cause and effect. David Hume was perfectly right in that. But it leads to something, because we still have this need. We still realize that we're out of touch with the one, with the spiritual unity of all things. So what happens is, in place of what we have lost from the being connected with the one, we have blind faith. And blind faith is really a wonderful thing, when for no reason at all we can make connections just because we have faith that everything that we see around us does have these connections. We have faith that there is a spiritual connection. So in a strange way, it leads to, Steiner has put it very, very beautifully, where he says that early humanity, just shortly after the fall, and even until the last vestiges of clairvoyance were lost, early humanity believed in God because they couldn't doubt. We believe in God because we can doubt. And all of our doubts are answered, and our blind leap of faith gives an answer to every question and every doubt that we have. All right. Finally, we come to that monstrous thing that we call the second self, the lower nature, with all of its mimicry, all of its aping image, the lower, this the whole story of Cain and Abel also takes place within us. We have the fighting brothers right within ourselves. We have the internal feud and the violent separation within ourselves when we try to actually kill off our conscience and do all of that sort of thing. I don't want to get into that because that would be another whole talk or another whole series of talks to talk about the Cain and Abel story in that way. But what I want to say is that when this mind and desire nature get built together to become a separate self or a personal ego, a lower self or a lower nature, and they become the purpose of the divine for gaining experience and learning new things, when this becomes this analytical, materialistic mind that keeps questioning, this leads to a very good dialogue. Normally the question and answer should come between lower and higher nature, and it should be a very beautiful dialogue, like the dialogue in that famous book, The Imitation of Christ, or like the dialogue of was it Booker T. Washington that did all the work with the peanut? You know, he had that internal conversation. He went out one time. He said, "Lord, tell me the meaning of the universe," and the internal voice said, "You're not big enough to know that." And at another occasion, went out and was in his early morning stroll and said, "Lord, tell me the meaning of man." And the internal voice said, "You're not big enough to know that." And on the third occasion when he was out, said, "Lord, tell me about the peanut." And all of his work in organic chemistry came out of the response of that kind of conversation. But what I'm trying to say here is that the lower nature, even if it's argumentative, even if it's skeptical, even if it is hard-nosed, in some way enhances the questioning nature of that dialogue, and in many ways it fulfills the strengthening of our true spiritual self in the same way that a parent is strengthened by having a rebellious and refractory child, that is never cooperative. So the higher self is strengthened by having this kind of lower self. And that brings us now to the very difficult topic, always a difficult issue, the issue of self. The question is, with the issue of self, why would one want to develop a strong, clearly defined self when selflessness is a higher value? It's much more futuristic to think in terms of selflessness, but why would one want to develop a strong self or sense of self? From a spiritual outlook, this is all a matter of perspective. And though it might seem wildly contradictory to develop a strong self, when one of the ultimate goals is a spiritual selflessness or unselfishness, it is not a contradiction to have a strong self and to be strongly unselfish. There are fundamental reasons why this whole evolutionary creation has taken place at all. Experience, we've mentioned that again and again. The development of creativity and of a creative mind. And soul power to be can only come from the muscle that is built to this kind of thing. And character. Experience, any kind of experience, is valuable because the spirit is omnipresent and it gains from all experiences. creativity is where the divine comes into being. It just can't placidly be there. It creates. And we can see it in my soul power and character go along with that. All of these capabilities or all of these divine intents are more obviously enhanced by having a strong self. A strong self is capable of more intense, more clear, more definitive experiences. A strong self is more likely to be more creative. And if the ultimate soul power and its flavor is character, obviously having a strong self that has had strong experiences, there's going to be more soul flavor there. There's going to be, from that kind of experiences, it's going to be bringing home to the divine something very valuable, not just sort of slipping through life as easy as we can slip through life. I want to examine why it isn't a contradiction to have a strong self, which is one of the results of our fall, and how that leads to a valuable selflessness in terms of an image that we've looked at before. And that, tired you out on notes already, huh? And that is the image of the vortex. It's only an analogy, it's only a metaphor, it's only an image, but it's a really good image. Because it gives the double play on existence and emptiness from many philosophies converge in that image. If we look at a vortex or a rill or a whirl in the ocean, it's actually a nothing. Nothing is there. It's an empty spot. It's a void, or it's a vacuum in the ocean. None of the stuff is in it. It is empty. If you look at the ocean, on the other hand, the ocean is an emptiness. It isn't a thing. It's empty of thinghood. It's empty of shape. It's just the shape of the ocean basin because that happens to be the shape that it's in. So that each has a kind of emptiness. The whirlpool of vacuous emptiness and the ocean in emptiness from any particular form, even though all forms live in it. And the ocean is lively because it has all of the waves and currents and tides and everything rushing through it. It has all of that kind of life, even in its form. When the vortex is the idea of self, it exists in the ocean of selfness. It is as evanescent and it is as empty as the ocean vortex. Self as self alone is an empty nothingness. But as an idea, it's really interesting, the idea of self, we can't think of self not being anywhere. It is universal in terms of space, and it is also universal in terms of time. That idea can be conceived at any time, and it can be an infinite idea of self. The vortex cannot spontaneously generate itself. That is our selfhood. We cannot make ourself in ourself. What we call selfhood, or that vortex of selfhood, is the consequence of the divine will of the divine spirit. And the receptive imagination in the life of life spirit. So what the selfhood is, the vortex of our selfhood, is a consequence of the assertion of the divine will and the receptivity of the ocean of selfhood to receive it. Even when we as selves assert our will, we are not asserting ourselves alone. What we are doing is participating in an ongoing union of the divine spirit and the life spirit, or you might say the cosmic father and mother. The birth of self, or the assertion of self as a vortex, is accomplished in the same way as every other vortex. When we set things whirling in our aura by a divine concentration, we are applying will and imagination to set everything spinning. The generation of self, or the assertion of self, is accomplished the same way. It's accomplished the same way. You know, like if you go into a deep concentration, if you go into a deep prayer, everything starts spinning and you see a vortex of light. We're participating in the same process of the divine will and the divine imagination if it precipitates like a spiral vortex in space. It's the same kind of activity. Only there, the concentration, whether it is in a deeply answered prayer or whether it is in the production of a spiral galaxy, the concentration is brought to where the invisible actually manifests as a kind of visible light. Whether we see it with the inner eye or with the outer eye, the same kind of assertion of will, or the statement of will and the receptivity of it, it sets everything spinning in the same way. So that vortex, the divine vortex of selfhood, is produced in the same way that any other vortex is produced. In this process, the ocean of conception, the receptive imagination, doesn't have a self. It's the soft stuff of selfness. And so you can see that there is a direct relationship between the self as being an expression of selfness and an expression of the divine will. So the self is neither of those, but it is a product of those. So that in some ways, did that click off? Oh, my goodness. I didn't think it was going to take quite that long. We've got about one. So, if you look at a whirlpool, at a vortex, what you're really looking at is an emptiness, is a nothing. If you try to look at self, self has no meaning except as an expression of the divine in life spirit. But on the other hand, if you look at the life spirit, which is much easier to look at, it has a different kind of emptiness. It is an emptiness of any kind of discrete separation that, just like the ocean, it's formless. And out of that formlessness, all form comes. So there is an emptiness in both of them and there is a fullness in both of them. The image, when you get into the spiritual world, is much, much more difficult to conceive, because even though the vortex is there, that doesn't mean that the life spirit doesn't flow through it. And when you get into multidimensional things, it becomes very difficult. But it is important to note that the feminine quality, so to speak, of the life spirit, of the selfness, it knows itself, even though it isn't in it. It's hard to use words at this point. It knows itself in the child, in the creation of self. And so what happens is the same thing that happens in our prayers. When we want to love, and when we form this very, very deep concentration, the vortex, the emptiness that is produced in that becomes a receptacle that love knows itself in the process of producing a self, even though the self is empty in its way and the love is empty in its own way. So what I'm trying to say is, in this whole process where we have to, as spiritual beings, just to overcome our own, what we think we are, this lower self, in that struggle, and in the struggle to persevere in the world, this takes a really strong assertion of self. We have become very strong separative self. But there is nothing wrong with that, because in the same way that the deepest concentrated prayer excites and awakens and makes everything alive in the spirit, in our whole being, in the definition of self, there is a greater fulfillment of the divine and life spirit by producing this separative self. So there's nothing wrong. In fact, it is to be encouraged to have very strong selves. But to be preoccupied with self and to have the value of all things to lie in self rather than in the source of self, that is where things run amok. That is where we live in lives of emptiness. Okay, so in a small way, we've looked in this and we've seen then that all of our deviations, the hardness and the desire and the mentality and the development of self, all of those things as deviations are virtues, and they are virtues in the making. And if we can keep from being focused on self, but have a very strong self, a very strong character to bring to things, that shows that the process that we are in can be very valuable. What I'm trying to say is that this doesn't all have to be an enumeration of sins. It can be an enumeration of virtues, and if we can see the tendency to hardening and get the best that we can out of it, if we can release this energy without it being destructive and violent and get the best out of it, that is the best that we can get out of the creation. And that's what we're trying to talk about. We're trying to talk now about redemption, and not about the creation, but by redeeming these faults or these errors and bringing them into something positive. I want to talk just a little bit about the whole path itself, and then what's going to happen is next time we're going to talk more about redemption, and in the final talk we're going to talk about Prometheus. Hopefully. I'm pushing very hard to get to that. This swing in matter that began in Lemuria and that will end with what is sometimes called the Galilean epoch is like every other swing. It's like the swing of a baseball bat or the swing of a club. And all the same things are important. That is, you can't let up. You can't let up in a swing. If you do, you just get a piddling little the ball just bounces off. We must apply ourselves in this evenly and regularly all the way. Life is not for the faint of heart. If we want to have, it's very much like the poem from, what's his name? Oh my goodness, I'll give you the line of the poem. If a fool persists in his folly, he will become wise. It's from the same man who wrote, Songs of Innocence. Blake. Yes. Yeah, he wrote that. Yes. We have to apply ourselves every step of the way. We can't hold up and we can't change a swing in the middle to be something else. A swing has to be true all the way through. If something is off of an arc, you can't make it be another arc. This is an extremely important thing for all psycho-spiritual health, and it's as important there as it is in baseball or in golf. What? I'll pass on that right now. Good line, though. And in the same way, it's very much like a baseball swing or a golf swing. You have the same limits. There's only so far back you can go, and there's only so far forward you can go. And we can say that it hasn't always been material, that the swing started somewhere, and that arc will proceed, and it will continue. So there are limits to it. It isn't going to go on. It isn't going to be a straight line. And just like a golf swing or a baseball swing, there is a symmetry between what happens in the first half of the swing before the depth of the swing, which in golf or baseball is an impact, and for us it is the deepest going into materiality. There's a symmetry. Jerry can probably tell you about when you roll your wrists in the swing, and so what happens? It's like every other swing. It's true that there are some differences between the foreswing and the after swing, but they are related as a unity. It's just like the swing into summer. There's a symmetry of light on both sides. There's a symmetry of temperature on both sides, but there are some things that there is an evolutionary progress. The first half of the swing is more causal. Like in spring, we do more sowing, and in fall, we do more reaping. But it's the same kind of an arc like that. And what I guess I'm trying to say is that if we can get ourselves into the swing of things and try to stay in that arc again without getting either too hyperactive or too hypoactive, we can fulfill this much more. It is important to remember at this point that at this time we are now coming out of the swing, and we are coming out of the creature half and going more into the creator half. We're not at a time of sowing, we are at a time of reaping. We are not at a time of taking, we are at a time of giving. But it still has to follow along so that everything that we did on the way down is redeemed as a creative action in symmetry on the way out. We note this even in our own life, that there seems that our whole life, in fact, turns out to be a swing, so that there's a symmetry, so that the things that we did early in life become like things that we experience in very late life, and there is a central turning point in life around which we begin, it's called midlife crisis. I don't know why, but it's midlife crisis is when you're stuttering and you're not going with the swing and you're not following through and you're not getting the reflection as we should. Okay, basically we have seen then that there is this arc and that there is a healthy following through of it, and that all of our conditions that we are most uncomfortable with now are virtues in the making, and there is a general formula to it. The same thing applies to our little sins, our little besetting sins, that we could apply the same kind of arc to them. But, I'm not going to stand up here and week after week talk about specific sins, because you know all of mine then. Yes?
I would just like to comment on while saying on baseball. She mentioned bunting. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The swing of things, I want to say, is, and you mentioned the follow-through and all of that. When it boils down to it, is you get to, if you make contact, you get to experience the full experience, and you'll reap the fruition of making the full contact. Whereas the bunting, that can be considered sacrifice for the moment, or sacrificing the experience for the greater good.
Oh, okay.
Okay? I mean,
that would be returning to the restraint, or what would be seen as the restraint of the spirit, in order to not have to assert your own way and have that, yes. Oh, lovely. Lovely thought.
Part of it, that's, didn't want to just lose that.
Yeah, I like that. See what you did, Bonnie? There's nothing you can do that can mess it up at all. I like it all. All right. I guess that's most of what I want to say. We don't need to go into all of our special little sins. We see them all as syndromes that we get into again and again and again. Next time, I just want to look at a few more facets of redemption and stating of the whole business all over again in really simplistic terms, and talk a little bit about freedom, because that's what it is all about. And then we'll look at the parallel myth of Prometheus and Pandora, and we'll do that really fast in the time following. And then we'll be done for the year anyway. There'll be more next year. This is purgatory, to be fascinated with this type of stuff and have to go through it, follow through, okay? Yes.
Picking it on there.
There was another thing when you were talking about vortexes. I mean, I hadn't really considered it in the terms that you were talking about, that self is really nothing. But when it boils down to it, self, I guess, would be considered ego, which is an illusion, really. But it's given to you to, I wrote down to give us awareness, but it's given to us to show us all the, to make us aware of the whole big picture. And the more ego we're given, I think, the more we become aware of certain things, and whether it be in this lifetime then or the next, the more you will be aware of how far you have to go in the opposite direction in the big picture of things. But yeah, it doesn't exist because it's all part of the I am.
Yes. The beast has many eyes. And if you look at the spirit as raw, creative power, you can see that as the beast. And each of us are eyes. And our function is merely to focus and look for the one, for that raw power. I like the words that you used, is given to us, because even the us is given. Yeah, and it's a funny thing that it can only know its selfness, its own existence or identity through our self. And God is born. Instead of saying God is dead because we have ignored it, one might say that God is born and knows God as God through all of the onenesses or the one individuals that have been developed. Yeah. Great. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
No more questions.